Before that winter, I adored how snow transformed the world into a tranquil, silent wonderland. As a child, I'd wait with restless excitement for the first snowfall, dreaming of the adventures it promised. Even in adulthood, I found something comforting about the cold. It slowed the pace of life, almost like a reset. But that January would completely change how I felt about winter. My marriage had started to show fractures, cracks I had willfully ignored until then. Though Megan and I were still making an effort, that January put our relationship to the test. Winters are always challenging where we live, but this one had an edge, something darker. For 2 weeks straight, the sky remained an oppressive gray, offering only the faintest snowfall. Then, midway through the month, a major storm was predicted, and everyone braced themselves for a weekend snowed in, including us. Megan and I had planned a date for January 15th, but the relentless snowfall disrupted our plans, canceling work and shutting the city down. Instead of heading out, we spent the evening at home in cozy clothes while our kids refused to settle down for the night, buzzing with excitement about the snow day ahead. Once they finally fell asleep, I handed Megan a glass of wine. "I'm sorry, Megan," I said. "This isn't the evening I'd planned for us." "It's okay, Ryan," she replied. "I was looking forward to it, but honestly, this is nice too. Besides, I even got a new dress you haven't seen yet." She smiled playfully. "You know the rule. You don't get to see it until we actually go out." I looked at her, captivated once again by her effortless sense of style. Megan had a knack for standing out without ever seeming like she was trying. When she couldn't find exactly what she wanted, she'd simply make her own clothes, often creating charming, whimsical outfits for our daughter, Sophia, too. Glancing at the diamond on her finger, I said, "Thank you for saying yes to me, Megan. I love you." "I love you too, Ryan," she replied softly. We sat in companionable silence for a moment before I spoke again. "I've been so on edge lately. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault. I felt the same way," she admitted, her laugh lightening the mood. "This winter's turned everyone grumpy, hasn't it? But we've got each other and the kids. That's what matters most." We shared a nostalgic laugh about our very first date. Back in college, I'd been so broke that I took her to Wendy's, but Megan didn't care about fancy restaurants. She just wanted to spend time with me. Even now, we'd occasionally grab Wendy's for old time's sake. The storm delivered on its promise that weekend, burying the town under 2 feet of snow and bringing everything to a halt. The kids were thrilled. No school, endless pizza, movies, and hours playing in the snow. Megan and I enjoyed the unexpected break too, just savoring time together as a family. The only downside? The kids insisted on watching Frozen on repeat, and Megan still wouldn't let me see her new dress. "You'll have to take me out for that," she teased. By Sunday night, the snowplows had cleared the streets, and the real world was ready to resume its grip. School and work loomed on Monday, but the weekend left us with a rare, warm memory. A few days later, Megan got a call from her best friend, Amy. When she hung up, her excitement was palpable. She told me they were planning a night out to shake off the dreary month. A dinner, some dancing, and even a hotel stay. "That sounds perfect," I said. "But there's just one condition. You wear that dress you've been hiding from me." "With pleasure," she whispered, her smile hinting at a night I'd never forget. When the evening came, Megan descended the stairs in the dress. It was blue, though I couldn't tell you the exact shade. Whatever it was, it made her blue eyes absolutely shine. The dress had long sleeves, a modest high neckline, and a skirt that fell below her knees, but it was anything but conservative. The way the fabric hugged her figure and swirled when she moved made her impossible to ignore. She looked stunning. As I stood there, speechless, she smiled and gently closed my gaping mouth with her finger. "It's still just me," she said softly. Dinner was lively, with a group of 10 friends laughing and enjoying the evening. Megan was easily the most striking woman in the room, and I made sure she knew it, touching her hand or arm whenever I had the chance. She responded with warm smiles, and we shared a connection that made the night feel like ours alone. After checking into our hotel rooms, we headed to the club. Megan leaned close to me and whispered, "We don't have to stay too long, do we?" Her words were loaded with promise, and I couldn't wait to get back to our room either. At the club, Megan drew attention, but she only had eyes for me. Until Lorenzo Carter, a local celebrity and retired football player, showed up. His presence caused quite a stir, and to my surprise, he approached Megan and asked her to dance. I watched as she accepted, the two of them gliding across the floor to two slow songs. Seeing her in his arms unsettled me in a way I hadn't expected. When she returned to the table, I leaned in and asked if it was time to leave. For a split second, fear flickered in her eyes. Then she excused herself, claiming she needed the restroom. Amy followed her, but after a few minutes, only Amy came back. "She's not in the restroom," Amy finally admitted, avoiding my gaze. "She's left the club." Stunned, I scanned the room, then rushed outside. A Honda sedan was pulling out of the lot, but it wasn't her. Moments later, I spotted a black Corvette speeding away. My gut twisted. I fumbled for my phone and called her. No answer. I tried again, but this time it went straight to voicemail. She turned off her phone. When I returned to the club, Amy was waiting for me. "Ryan," she said quietly, "Megan's gone. She's with Lorenzo tonight." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Anger surged through me as my mind filled with images of Megan. Her dress, her laugh, the way she danced with him. So, she left me for some washed-up jock on our special night? I growled. "It's just one night," Amy said, trying to placate me. "She'll come home tomorrow, Ryan. She loves you." "She didn't even have the decency to tell me," I snapped. "She snuck out like a coward." My voice rose, drawing attention from nearby patrons. "Ryan, calm down," Amy pleaded. "It's just one night. She'll come back, and everything will be fine." Bitterly, I shot back. "What if it's not fine? What if she can't make this right?" Amy sighed. "You're a good man, Ryan. You'll forgive her because deep down, you know she loves you." I shook my head, seething. "So, if Lorenzo had chosen you, you'd have done the same thing?" Amy hesitated, her silence telling me everything I needed to know. "No, and Adam doesn't need to know," Amy said quietly. I ignored her and headed back to the table, where everyone sat in silence, avoiding my eyes. They all knew. The empty chair next to mine was a glaring reminder of Megan's betrayal. My stomach tightened as I grabbed my jacket and keys, choking back tears. Before I could leave, Amy and Adam blocked my path. "Where are you going, Ryan?" Amy asked. "I'm leaving." "I can't stay here," I replied, my tone sharp and cold. "Come on, Ryan," Adam said. "You two will get through this." I glared at him, my anger barely contained. Why shouldn't I divorce her? We agreed, once and done. "Think of your kids," Jane interjected. "Is that what Megan's thinking about right now?" I shot back bitterly. Jane faltered but kept trying. "Ryan, if a supermodel came onto you tonight, could you honestly say you wouldn't be tempted?" "Tempted? Sure," I replied coldly, "but I wouldn't act on it. I have a wife, or at least, I did until tonight." Adam called me out for overreacting, and that was it. I stepped closer, my voice low and threatening. "Back off," I growled, shoving him back into his seat. The room went silent as I threw a $20 bill onto the table. "That covers my tab," I said venomously. "You can cover hers too." Without another word, I stormed out of the club. The cold air hit me as I headed toward the hotel, my thoughts a tangled mess. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, a memory we'd treasure. Instead, it had become one of the darkest nights of my life. Megan should have been beside me, laughing with our friends. Instead, I was utterly alone. When I stepped into the hotel room, I was greeted by haunting reminders of what the evening should have been. Chocolates on the pillows, and a new blue lingerie set carefully laid out on the bed. I picked it up, imagining Megan wearing it, but the thought was unbearable. She wasn't coming back. Not tonight. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the delicate fabric as the reality of the situation sank in. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, was with someone else. I broke down, overwhelmed by pain and anger. Hours passed in a blur until I finally woke, still holding the lingerie. With a bitter resolve, I tossed it into the trash, packed up our belongings, and ate the chocolates. Not out of hunger, but spite. Checking out of the hotel, I got into my car, seething with anger. As I drove, I realized I'd been reacting all night, waiting for Megan to stop Lorenzo or for something to change. That wasn't who I was. I was always the one in control, the one solving problems. It was time to take charge. I made a sharp U-turn and headed back to the club. At the bar, I cornered the bartender, who hesitated before admitting Lorenzo had a reputation for preying on married women. Frustrated, I turned to leave when a woman at the bar gave me a lead. "He lives in the big gray house near Meadowbrook Park," she said softly. I drove to the neighborhood and found the house easily, a sprawling mansion with a black Corvette parked out front. My stomach churned as I approached the door, but I forced myself to ring the bell. Lorenzo appeared in a bathrobe, clearly annoyed. "I'm here for Megan," I said flatly. "She's not here," he lied, trying to shut the door. I blocked it with my foot. "Let me talk to her, or I'll call the police." "You don't want that kind of trouble." Reluctantly, he called for Megan. She appeared moments later, her face shifting to surprise when she saw me. "What are you doing here, Ryan?" she asked defensively. "Let's go home," I said firmly. "We can talk about this privately." She shook her head. "I'm staying here tonight. Lorenzo will take me home tomorrow." Her indifference stung. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "This will have consequences, Megan," I said. "Go home, Ryan. We'll talk tomorrow," she replied coldly. Then, without another word, she stepped back inside and slammed the door. I stood there for a moment, numb. Then I turned and walked to my car. Opening the trunk, I grabbed a knife and narrated into my phone. "I'm cutting the valve stems on all 4 tires of Mr. Carter's Corvette. This will cost no more than $100 to repair." After finishing, I left a $500 check under the windshield wiper and called the police. "There's a vandal at Lorenzo Carter's house," I reported calmly. Not done, I grabbed a wrench and smashed the driver's side window. The alarm blared into the night as I stood back, waiting. Moments later, Lorenzo stormed out, furious. "Is this worth your career?" I asked, holding the wrench firmly. He froze, unsure of what to do. The police arrived minutes later. I dropped the wrench and raised my hands. A female officer cuffed me, whispering an apology as she did. I asked her to note the check I'd left, but Lorenzo, grinning smugly, tore it up as Megan stood silently nearby. At the station, I made my one call to the local newspaper, offering them a story about Lorenzo Carter. After a restless night in a holding cell, I was released the next morning and met by my lawyer, Evan. Over coffee, I told him everything. "Ryan, you need to file for divorce," he said bluntly. I nodded, the decision heavy but necessary. Evan dropped me off just in time to see Lorenzo's Corvette being towed. For the first time all night, I allowed myself a bitter smile. Back at home, the house was eerily quiet. I showered, changed, and collapsed on the couch, utterly drained. A few hours later, the front door opened. "Ryan, I'm home," Megan called, her tone unnervingly casual. She walked in wearing the same blue dress, as though nothing had happened. "What were you thinking?" she began, her voice sharp with accusation. "Lorenzo could have destroyed you. Do you even care what you've done?" I met her gaze, my voice like ice. "Are you proud of yourself, Megan? How do you think your parents will feel when they hear about this?" She tried to reassure me, claiming nothing had changed between us and insisting she still loved me. But her words rang hollow. I couldn't believe her anymore. "If that's true, then maybe we never had what I thought we did," I said. Megan's face fell, and she silently walked upstairs. When she came back down in sweats, she asked about the lingerie she'd left on the bed. "I threw it in the trash," I replied coldly. "Just like you threw away our night," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. She tried to convince me she had planned to make things right, but it was too late. "Was it everything you expected?" I asked. The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Megan's worried eyes met mine. "Ryan, I know you have questions, and I'll answer them honestly if you want. But are you sure you want to hear it? I don't want to hurt you more." "It's a bit late to worry about hurting me, don't you think?" I replied. She winced, nodding. "I know," she whispered. "But if I tell you, it might make it harder for us to move forward. Can't we just focus on the future instead of letting one night destroy everything?" "That's something you should have thought about last night," I said, my voice sharp. I pointed to a vase on the mantel. How many times can I throw that before it shatters? Even if you glue it back together, it's never the same. Ryan, I love that vase, but I can live without it. I can't live without our marriage, she said. What we've built is stronger than one mistake. I know you're hurt, but I believe you love me enough to get through this. Until last night, I thought you loved me enough not to cheat. I guess we were both wrong, I said, my voice like steel. Megan slumped in her chair. Was the night with him everything you expected? I asked again. Lorenzo's not a bad guy, Ryan, she began hesitantly. Any man who takes a married woman to bed is an asshole, I snapped. He didn't take me, she shot back defensively. Then what do you call last night? Okay, fine. He took me for the night. But I'm here now, and I'll stay with you forever. So, what? You're like a toy he played with and returned? What happens when the next celebrity comes along? Another night alone for me? No. I'm here because I love you. This is my home, she pleaded. And if he'd asked you to stay longer? I pressed. Megan blushed. You're right, she admitted quietly, but he was kind and respectful. I wish you wouldn't call him that. Oh, should I thank him for treating you like a free hooker? I snapped, standing up in anger. She shrank back, and I sat down, trying to calm myself. All right, I said after a pause. Was it everything you expected? More, she said softly, meeting my eyes with sympathy. I sighed, my stomach twisting. How did it start? She explained how Lorenzo had asked her to dance, and though she hadn't planned for anything to happen, she couldn't resist. At first, it was just 2 dances, but after the second one, I felt something more. I didn't decide to do it, Ryan. I just knew I would, she admitted. Her words hit me like a blow, but I stayed quiet as she continued. He told me to meet him by the back door. I appreciated that he didn't rub it in your face. You thought I was eager to be with you after dancing, but you didn't realize you were eager to leave me, I said bitterly. I wasn't leaving you, she protested. It was just one night, like running an errand. I knew I'd come back. Running an errand? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Sleeping with him was like going to the store? No, she said, flinching, but I was never leaving you. I asked if she would have stayed if I had cut in during the dances. She looked me in the eye. No. Her answer cut deep. Do I mean so little to you? I asked quietly. No, Ryan. You mean the world to me. Your actions say otherwise. From the moment he approached you, I meant nothing, I said. I checked the clock. I'll get the kids, help settle them, then I'm going out. I can't deal with this right now. Ryan, I didn't do this to hurt you, she pleaded. Please don't do anything that makes it harder for us to stay together. You already made it hard enough. Think of Sophia and Ethan, I snapped. You didn't think of them last night. Before I left, I told her, write down what happened. I don't need details of what you did. I need to know what you were thinking. I can't stand to look at you right now. I'll do whatever you ask, she said desperately. But how can I make it up to you if you're not here? Not until you show me a clean STD test, I said bluntly. Megan blushed. Must you embarrass me? She asked. Lorenzo's an athlete. He's clean. Did you ask him? I shot back. She didn't reply. I grabbed my coat and left, disgusted. When I picked up the kids, their excited chatter filled the car, bringing a much-needed distraction. Back home, they greeted Megan with the same joy while I unpacked their bags and quietly packed my own. After supper and bedtime stories, we tucked them in. I kissed them goodnight and promised myself that no matter what, I would always do right by them. Later that evening, Megan approached me cautiously. Ryan, are you sure you want me to write it all down? Do you really want to relive this pain later? Exhausted, I replied. I never wanted this, but you did it anyway. I need to understand what happened to move forward. She reached out to touch me, but I stepped back. Her hand fell to her side, and she paled. I'll do what you asked. I'll even mark the parts that might hurt the most so you can skip them. I nodded, picked up my bag, and said, I'll see you tomorrow after dinner. I love you, Ryan, she whispered. You know, I used to believe that, I replied, walking out the door. As I left, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered. Hello? Hi, This is Lisa Collins from the Sentinel. Do you have a moment to talk about your incident with Lorenzo Carter? Over the next half hour, I told her the story. I had retold it enough times by now that I could get through it without feeling crushed. Lisa said she'd write it up for the next day's paper and asked if she could contact me again. I agreed. Afterward, I checked into a cheap hotel halfway between home and work. I grabbed a few beers at a small local bar but barely registered the surroundings. My life, as I had envisioned it, was shattered. I knew I had to focus on the kids. They needed stability, a home where they could grow. That was non-negotiable. But Megan? She seemed to believe things would eventually go back to normal. I knew better. Things would never be the same. Were Megan and I over? I didn't have the answer yet. But the thought of our kids being shuffled between two homes was unbearable. We had to figure something out for the kids. The next evening, I returned home to their usual chaotic, joyful greeting. Megan smiled at me, but I held up my hand. Don't touch me until you give me what I asked for. After the kids were in bed, she handed me a stack of handwritten pages. I spent a lot of time on this, Ryan. I've tried to answer everything honestly. I know it will hurt, and I cried while writing it. But I won't lie to you. Tentatively, she placed the papers in my hand. Good night, Ryan. I love you. She leaned in to kiss me, but I stopped her with a raised hand. She left, her face tight with pain. I stared at the pages in my hands, her familiar handwriting a cruel reminder of the woman I thought she was. Taking a deep breath, I began to read. Dear Ryan, when you left, you said you didn't understand how I could say, I love you, after what I did. I was stunned. I think you meant that if I truly loved you, I wouldn't have done it. And up until Lorenzo came to our table, I would have agreed. Then, somehow, everything changed. I want you to know my love for you hasn't wavered, even though I know I've hurt you deeply. I didn't cheat to hurt, humiliate, or get back at you. I'm trying to be honest, even if it's painful, because you deserve the truth. When Lorenzo took me in his arms, I felt overwhelmed. His size and strength made me feel small and powerless, but never unsafe. It wasn't that I had no choices, but it felt like everything had already been decided. From the first slow dance, I knew I was his for the night. I didn't resist. I went along with it. Did I like it at the time? Yes. Now? I hate myself for giving up control so easily to someone who didn't care about me. Would it have been the same with any other man? No, I don't think so. It was just Lorenzo. When I signaled Amy to go to the restroom, she already knew. She said Lorenzo wanted me because I wasn't chasing him. She called me lucky and promised to keep you distracted so I could get away. Lorenzo was waiting outside with my coat. I don't even know how he got it without the ticket. Celebrity perks, I guess. When he helped me into my coat and touched my shoulders, I felt overwhelmed all over again. He drove me to his house, put on soft music, and we danced in his living room. I think he wanted to seem like a gentleman by not rushing me to bed, which I appreciated. We kissed as we danced, and he stayed in control. Later, he carried me to the bedroom and undressed me slowly. I've never been so aroused. It felt like we were together for hours, and it was everything I wanted in the moment. At one point, I thought about texting you to say I was safe and that I loved you, but I was too tired and just fell asleep. I woke up to someone pounding on the door. I didn't know it was you. When I saw you, I was shocked. I wanted Lorenzo to send you away, but he told me to talk to you. I didn't know what to say, so I told you to go home. Afterward, I broke down sobbing. Lorenzo comforted me and held me until I fell asleep again. When the car alarm went off, Lorenzo somehow knew it was you. I was terrified something terrible would happen between you two, but the police arrived before it escalated. It was humiliating to give a statement and explain who I was and why I was there. The officer judged me, Ryan, and it wasn't fair. Then they arrested you, and I cried for the next 20 minutes in Lorenzo's living room. How could something that started so beautifully go so wrong? The next morning, I woke up in Lorenzo's arms again. We had sex one last time before breakfast. After that, something shifted. It felt like Lorenzo had let me go. I started thinking about you and how devastated you must feel. I realized then that you were right. He got what he wanted and didn't need me anymore. Lorenzo dropped me off at home and thanked me for a wonderful time. He gave me a hug and a light kiss, and that was it. As I walked through the door, I was eager to show you how much I love you and how committed I am to our marriage. I still feel that way. I don't think Lorenzo meant to hurt you. He treated me well, like a lady, but it wasn't about me. It could have been any woman. He's a skilled lover, and it was the best sex I've ever had. But it wasn't with me or for me. It was on me. That made it impersonal. You, Ryan, are an excellent man. You've learned how to love me over time, and that's worth more than the greatest sex. If Lorenzo asked me to leave you and marry him, I'd say no. Even without Sophia and Ethan, I would always choose you. I know my love didn't stop me from giving Lorenzo what should have been only yours, and I know that's hard to forgive. But my love for you hasn't changed, Ryan. Love, Megan. I set the pages down, feeling mentally and physically drained. How could she have an affair and then ask me to just move forward? Is this what marriage has become? Commitment without loyalty? If so, what's the point of it? Megan played her game, but now it's her turn to face the consequences. I gathered the pages Megan had written, turned off the lights, and left for my hotel. Monday morning at work was a blur. I couldn't focus, going through the motions until my 1 p.m. meeting with the divorce lawyer Evan had arranged. I arrived at Laura Reed's office unsure of what to expect. She was an older woman, sharp and energetic, with a no-nonsense demeanor that made me uneasy. She repeatedly said, "If I decide to take your case," even though I'd assumed her representation was guaranteed. After I explained the situation, she asked bluntly, "Are you sure you're not exaggerating?" I told her everything, including playing the recording from Lorenzo's house. As Megan's confession and the altercation played out, a smile spread across Laura's face. "I need a copy of this recording," she said, impressed. "And that written confession, too." When she asked what I wanted, I admitted, "I wish none of this had happened, but that's not possible. I'd like to magically be okay with it, but I'm not. I'm deeply hurt, and I think the best thing is to start the divorce." Laura nodded thoughtfully but warned me about lingering trust issues. She suggested hiring an investigator to verify Megan's promises. It could cost a few $1,000s, but it might help you rebuild trust or reveal the truth. I hesitated but understood her cold logic. Before I left, Laura assured me, "I'll handle the legal side. You focus on your life." Later that day, I met Luke Mitchell, a middle-aged man who sold surveillance equipment. I spent nearly $3,800 on tools to monitor Megan's calls, texts, and activities. Luke helped me set up an app on her phone to record everything discreetly. It felt wrong, but I couldn't shake the need to know the full truth. I left work early and headed home. Megan was in the kitchen, starting dinner. She looked tense but managed a small smile. "Hi," she said softly. I greeted her, but there was no hug, no kiss. She knew the conversation ahead would be hard. I spent time with the kids, soaking in their excitement, while Megan stewed silently in her thoughts. That morning, I'd secretly installed the surveillance app on her phone. It took less than 10 minutes. She hadn't even changed her password. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, we sat together on the sofa with glasses of wine. "How was your day?" Megan asked cautiously. "Typical Monday," I replied flatly. "Tiring." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Mine wasn't too bad. It was nice to think about something other than everything." "I wish I could say the same," I replied sharply. Megan flinched, then said, "Dee called this afternoon. What did she want?" I asked, already annoyed. "She's not as bad as you think," Megan replied defensively. "She asked about you first, before Lorenzo. She said she's sorry for your pain and that it'll get better, just a bump in the road." "That shows how much she knows," I said coldly. The room fell silent, the tension between us palpable. We sat there like we always had, just another night at home, but everything was different. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I could tell Megan felt it too. "Do you have any questions about what I wrote?" she asked hesitantly. I shook my head. "I was looking for something in your letter, but it wasn't there." Her body tensed. "What was missing?" "Any sign that you understand what I have to get past if we're going to stay together," I said, my voice firm. She shuddered. "Do you want to talk about that now, or are you too tired?" "You need to know, but it doesn't have to be tonight. The sooner we talk, the sooner you can start healing," she added softly. All right, I said, gathering my thoughts. Let's imagine this was our first date. You leave with another man, spend the night with him, and come back the next morning. Would there have been a second date? Ryan, it was Lorenzo, she replied, as if that explained everything. Why does that matter? You still chose him over me. If it were our first date, she admitted reluctantly, I'd never expect to hear from you again. But after almost 10 years of marriage, her voice faltered, how am I supposed to move past it, Megan? I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I'm only your first choice when a better option isn't available. Megan looked horrified. No, Ryan. You've always been my first choice. One night doesn't change that. One night did change it, I said firmly. You chose him, from the moment he asked you to dance until he was done with you. How can I convince you that's not true? She whispered. You can't, because it is. You made choices every step of the way, signaling D, telling her to cover for you, walking toward him. You chose him over me every time. Megan was quiet for a long moment. Maybe I just don't want it to be true. I don't want to believe I'm the kind of person who could do that, even though my friends think it's okay. But that's not what's in my heart. A week ago, we knew everything about each other's hearts. Now, I don't even know what to believe, I said, my voice heavy. She sighed. I know I hurt you, but wounds heal over time, don't they? This doesn't have to affect our whole future. You're right, it'll hurt less eventually. But this changed everything, I said. You broke the trust one had in you and in our marriage. Things I thought were private between us are gone. What's left to count on? She couldn't answer, only sighed again. I haven't changed, Ryan. I'm still just me. I know, I said quietly, and I haven't changed either. But what you did Friday night changed us. Megan was silent for a long time. I know this is hard, and I know I hurt you deeply, but you always find a way through difficult things. You'll find a way through this too. I sighed, rubbing my temples. What if the man you married died that night, or the next morning? Her eyes filled with sadness, but also determination. If he did, I'd know, because I'd have died too. But I don't believe it, not for a moment. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Maybe you're right, but I'm still struggling. Tonight, I'm going back to my hotel. As I left, the unfairness of it all hit me. Megan had made her choice, had her night, and even our friends seemed to think it was fine. Meanwhile, my life was a wreck, and somehow I was the one left to figure out how to move forward. Later that night, Evan called. Hey man, did you know the Sentinel ran your story? Carter and your wife are getting dragged through the mud. I hadn't thought about the article since speaking to the reporter. I stopped by a convenience store and picked up a copy of the paper. Sure enough, there it was, photos of Carter's shattered Corvette window and a detailed article. The story dove into his career, endorsements, and contract negotiations. While it wasn't explicitly stated, the scandal was clear. I stared at the page, wondering if this would be the start of something new, or just another step in a life I barely recognized anymore. For the next couple of hours, my phone didn't stop buzzing with calls from friends reacting to the newspaper article. Eventually, I let the calls go to voicemail, unable to deal with them. Back at my hotel, I listened to the messages, but one stood out. Ben Turner, host of Coffee in the Morning, a local sports talk radio show. Ryan, his message began. I saw the article and wanted to know if you'd call into our show tomorrow morning. Our peak audience is between 7:30 and 8:30, so if you can call at 7 o'clock, we'll try to get you on air. Here's the producer's number. I wasn't sure about going public with my story, but Ben's platform was tempting. Before I could decide, I got a notification from the app I'd installed on Megan's phone. It was a message from Lorenzo. Dear Megan, I was sorry not to see you at Morrison's last night. I hope you're not ill. I remember dancing with you and everything that followed very fondly. I'd like to get together again soon. I'll call you. The asshole had texted my wife. My stomach churned. She had given him her number. So much for, it's over, one and done. Why would she do that unless she planned to stay in touch? I anxiously waited to see if she'd respond, but thankfully, she didn't. Still, the damage was done. Exhausted, I finally fell asleep, only to face tormenting dreams. During the day, I could distract myself, but at night, I was defenseless. In my nightmares, I relived everything. Megan with Lorenzo, giving herself to him willingly. Her letter had said it was the best sex she'd ever had, and that haunted me. I woke up sweating, sometimes crying, only to fall asleep and pick up the nightmare right where it left off. Even awake, my mind wouldn't rest. Megan might have felt bad for hurting me, but it was clear she didn't regret being with Lorenzo. And thanks to his text, I suspected it wasn't over. How could I trust her again? That night at the club, I thought our marriage was at its strongest. But Megan let Lorenzo sweep her off her feet without a second thought for me. Even when I stood on his porch, she turned me away. She shut the door on me, on our love, and on our marriage. Tuesday morning, I woke before dawn, grateful to escape the nightmares. I remembered my call with the radio show and got ready, listening to coffee in the morning while I shaved and showered. The discussion revolved around the team's performance, with some light criticism of Lorenzo's play. At 7 o'clock, I called in. The producer reminded me to stick to the facts and avoid getting too emotional before putting me on hold. When Ben Turner finally brought me on, my nerves surged. "Let's bring in Ryan Parker," Ben said. "Ryan, you're not a sports analyst, right?" "No, just a fan like everyone else," I replied. "But you saw Lorenzo on Friday night and have some insight into what went down over the weekend, correct?" "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "You could say Lorenzo and I had some words, and that might have affected his game on Sunday." I walked the audience through the events at Morrison's, including my arrest. Ben kept me on track, and by the end of my 10-minute recount, my story was out. The phone lines lit up with callers, many ripping into Lorenzo for letting his personal life affect his performance. A few die-hard fans tried to defend him, but they were quickly drowned out. Ben kept me on for another 40 minutes as callers vented their anger. Toward the end of the show, Ben revealed that the team's VP of Public Affairs and Lorenzo's agent had requested to appear on the show the next day to set the record straight. Ben asked if I'd be willing to call in afterward to respond. It was clear he saw this as a win-win. Either the team cleared Lorenzo's name, or my story would dominate. Either way, Ben would get great radio. After the show, Art, the producer, called me back, now treating me like an old friend. He was stunned when I told him I had a recording of the incident at Lorenzo's house. "Can you send it over?" "We'd love to use it on air," he said excitedly. I agreed, but my phone kept buzzing with more notifications from Megan's app. I opened the messages and saw another text from Lorenzo. "Hi Megan, it's Lorenzo. I'd really like to see you again. Is this a good number to call? Let's set something up." 20 minutes later, another text followed. "Hi Megan, Lorenzo again. I really feel we have something special. I loved what we did and would like to do it again, and more." My heart pounded. Unlike the previous night, I didn't feel relieved that she hadn't responded. Instead, I felt like I was under attack, like the walls were closing in. How much more of this was I supposed to take? Before I could calm myself, my assistant knocked on my door. "Your boss wants to see you," she said. Since I'd arrived late after the radio show, I braced myself for the worst. But when I peeked into my boss's office, he greeted me with a smirk. "Come in, Ryan. Sit down. I want to talk to you," he said, motioning to a chair. I sat, prepared for a reprimand. "I heard you on coffee in the morning while driving to work," he chuckled. "Hell, half the company heard you." I grimaced. "I'm sorry, Mark. Relax," he interrupted. "I just want to say I'm sorry about what's happened. You should have told me what was going on Monday." "Well, I was still in shock," I admitted. "And honestly, it's humiliating when your wife does something like that with a celebrity. I'm not sure I've even processed it yet." Mark nodded. "I get it. Just know if you need time off, let me know. I'll cover for you." Relieved by his support, I thanked him and headed back to my office. But as I passed my coworkers, I noticed the way they looked at me. Everyone knew. The rest of the day felt surreal. Women in the office smiled at me more warmly, and the men offered sympathetic comments whenever I went for coffee. It was strange being the center of attention, especially knowing how broken my personal life was. Before Friday, my life had been steady, no major highs or lows. Now, everything felt like it was spinning out of control. I didn't seek out excitement, and maybe that's why Megan felt free to tear everything apart, knowing I'd always work to put it back together. But now, I realized my normal life had been an illusion, and there was no going back. As lunchtime rolled around, I steeled myself to sift through Megan's communications. I started with her texts and was struck by how much women gossip. Most of her work messages were trivial, small talk about coworkers and their outfits. I decided to save those for a late-night read with a beer. Her texts with friends were slightly more revealing, but the real insight came from her phone calls. The first voicemail was from Jane, one of the couples we were with at Morrison's. It was brief, just asking Megan to call her back. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane had been more involved than I realized. As I was deleting Jane's call, a notification popped up. Megan had texted Lorenzo. "Hi Lorenzo, thanks for the texts. I'm in a meeting with my boss right now, but can I call you in 30 minutes? I was worried you'd ignore me." He replied quickly, "Sure, call whenever." "Great, talk to you soon," she sent back. I held my breath reading their exchange. Was she just going to tell him to stop contacting her? I doubted it. Needing a break, I stepped out to grab coffee and used the restroom. When I returned, I continued sifting through Megan's call logs. Then, one call stood out. Her voice was soft and eager. "Hello? Lorenzo? Is that you?" "Of course, Megan. I miss you, babe," Lorenzo replied smoothly. "I miss you too. I can't get you out of my mind, but we need to be careful. Ryan can't find out I'm talking to you," Megan whispered. "Don't worry. It's not you he's after. It's me. He's blowing this out of proportion. He even went to the newspaper and did a radio show this morning, trying to make me look bad," Lorenzo said. Megan hesitated. "No, Ryan wouldn't do that. He was just here last night having dinner with us. He didn't say anything about it." "Well, he did. And people are upset. You need to talk to him and get him to back off before he digs himself into a hole," Lorenzo urged. "I'll talk to him, Lorenzo. But this isn't going the way I thought it would. I figured Ryan would be mad for a bit, and then things would go back to normal. But this time feels different," Megan admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know why you're making this so hard. We had something special, didn't we? You said I made you feel things no one else did. Not even him." Megan sighed. "Yes, but Ryan is a good husband and a great father. I feel safe with him. With you, it's exciting. But you've said you've never been faithful. How can I give up Ryan for you if I can't trust that you'll stay? Isn't it worth the risk?" Lorenzo pushed. "I can't risk my kids' future. I love you, but I need stability for them," Megan replied reluctantly. "Just give me more time, Megan. We'll figure it out. I'll talk to you tomorrow." "Okay, babe. Love you," Megan said softly. "Me too," Lorenzo replied. Hearing those words drained all hope from me. Laura had been right. Trust, but verify. Now, with my worst fears confirmed, I was at a loss. The rest of the day was a blur of sympathy from coworkers mixed with the crushing knowledge of Megan's continued connection with Lorenzo. By the time I left work, I felt hollow. At home, the atmosphere was tense. The kids were watching Frozen in the family room, oblivious to the turmoil, while Megan hovered over the stove. "Smells good," I said, trying to sound normal. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. The kids would love to spend time with you," she replied curtly, avoiding eye contact. Dinner was strange. The kids were chatty, but Megan was quiet, barely speaking to me. Every attempt I made to engage her was met with clipped replies. She was angry, but trying not to let it show in front of the kids. After dinner, I offered to do the dishes, but Megan told me to help get the kids ready for bed instead. Once Ethan was asleep and Sophia was settled with a book, Megan sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed. It was clear she wanted to talk. "I can't believe you did that," she began, her voice sharp with anger. "How could you be so callous and not consider my feelings?" "What exactly are you referring to?" I asked, though I already knew she meant the newspaper article or the radio show. "You know what I mean," she snapped. "I know you're mad at me, but to say such mean things about Lorenzo publicly? You're messing with his career. What about our friends, my parents, and my coworkers? What do they think of me now?" Her voice grew louder with each sentence. "If Lorenzo's worried about his career, maybe he shouldn't mess around with married women," I replied calmly. "As for what people think of you, they see you for what you are." Her face flushed with anger. "A cheap, Oh, sorry. A free hooker, I said coldly. Megan recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I continued, I gave you the chance to handle this privately, but you chose to stay with Lorenzo. Life is the sum of our choices, Megan. Actions have consequences. Even someone as arrogant as Lorenzo should know that. Lorenzo is furious with you, Ryan, she snapped. You have no idea what he's capable of. He's rich, influential, and well-connected. So when did you talk to him? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Her anger flickered into guilt. He called me at work, she admitted. And how did he get your number? Megan hesitated. I gave it to him, she whispered. When? I pressed. When he brought me home Saturday morning, she said, almost pleading. And why would you give him your number if you weren't planning to see him again? I asked, my voice firm. I wasn't thinking, she stammered. Well, the next time you talk to him, let him know it's only going to get worse from here, I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket. As for your other problems, we'll deal with them as they come. I need to go home now. I've got a busy day tomorrow, I added, heading for the door. But this is your home, Ryan, Megan said hesitantly. I'm not so sure, Megan. We'll see, I replied. Grabbing my backpack, I left. My visit to Luke was looking smarter by the minute. My laptop had been downloading the recordings from Megan's phone and our home cameras during our conversation. I just needed time to review them, but that would have to wait. For now, I needed distance. It was past midnight when I finally arrived back at my hotel. Exhausted but restless, I only managed a few hours of sleep before waking up at 4:30 a.m., my mind too anxious to let me rest. After tossing and turning, I gave up, showered, and got ready. By 6:30, I was driving to the radio station. When I arrived, Art greeted me and walked me through the plan. Lorenzo's agent and the team's public affairs representative would be live in the main studio with Dan, spinning their version of events. I would watch the segment from a separate studio behind a glass window, unseen by them, before taking my turn on air. At 6:55, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Ryan, I know where you are and what you're doing. Please don't do this. Think of me. Think of our family. Let it go. Please. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Clearly, Lorenzo had tipped her off. The desperation in her words only fueled my frustration. Without replying, I turned off my phone and sat back, bracing myself for what was to come. At 7 o'clock, Dan opened the show with his usual energy, blending news, commercials, and a dramatic recap of my story from the day before. Yesterday, we heard the story of Ryan Parker, an ordinary guy whose wife was swept away by superstar Lorenzo Carter, leaving him humiliated and alone. But today, our guests claim it's all just the ramblings of a bitter man going through a messy divorce. I muttered under my breath, great, are they setting me up? But Art shot me a reassuring look, and I stayed quiet, waiting as Lorenzo's team began their spin. Carter's representatives painted Lorenzo as the victim of a misunderstanding. According to them, Lorenzo hadn't known Megan was married and had simply escorted her home to ensure her safety. They framed me as an unstable, jealous husband who vandalized Lorenzo's car in a fit of rage. They even portrayed Lorenzo as a compassionate figure, suggesting he wanted to help me rebuild my life. The longer they spoke, the harder it was to contain my anger. Their polished lies, delivered with smug confidence, turned my stomach. By the end of their segment, Dan teased my upcoming appearance and promised listeners they'd soon hear the other side of the story. Carter's team shot me a few irritated glances through the glass as they left, their composure cracking slightly. Art escorted them out, and the tech crew began setting up for my segment. Ray, one of the techs, pulled me aside. We've got this, he said, his tone firm. I pulled clips from your recordings and theirs. When Dan asks questions, I'll handle the audio. Just focus on telling your story clearly. He hesitated, then added, I stayed up all night working on this because, honestly, I think you got screwed. Most guys fear this could happen, but you're living it, and it's real. I'll make sure they don't screw you again. His words gave me a boost of confidence I desperately needed. Soon, Dan's intro music played, and we were live. Dan opened by replaying snippets of Carter's team's interview. Then, he turned to me for my response. I took a deep breath and began walking the audience through the truth. Every time they claimed Lorenzo didn't know Megan was married, Ray played a clip of him explicitly acknowledging her husband. When they denied that Megan had been at Lorenzo's house, we aired her own recorded confession. Each of their lies was methodically dismantled, piece by piece. Dan was an expert at guiding the conversation. He let the recordings speak for themselves while giving me the space to provide context. By the end of my 30-minute segment, the phone lines lit up. Callers flooded in, tearing into Lorenzo and his team for their dishonesty. A few defenders tried to argue in his favor, but their voices were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming backlash. As the show wrapped up, Dan revealed that Carter's team had already requested to return the following day to set the record straight, once again. He asked if I'd be willing to call in afterward to respond. I agreed, knowing I couldn't let their lies go unchallenged. After the show, Art came over, grinning. "You were fantastic, Ryan," he said. "We've got a real story here, and you're handling it like a pro. By the way, I heard you recorded the incident at Lorenzo's house. Can we use it for tomorrow's show?" "Sure," I said, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. For the first time in days, I felt like I was fighting back instead of just taking hits. As I left the station, the weight of everything settled on me. The truth was out there now, and I had public support, but the personal toll was undeniable. Megan's betrayal still loomed over everything, and Lorenzo's manipulations weren't over. By the time I returned to my hotel, I was drained. I turned my phone back on, knowing the messages would be piling up but feeling too exhausted to deal with them. For now, I needed a moment to breathe. The battle on the airwaves had gone my way, but I knew the war was far from over. Ray, one of the techs, explained the plan. They'd pull audio clips from both sides to showcase the truth. "I stayed up all night working on this," Ray said, determination in his voice, "because I think you got screwed. I'll make sure that doesn't happen again." Dan's intro music played, and we were live. Over the next 30 minutes, Dan masterfully orchestrated the segment. He played clips from Carter's team, each followed by recordings I'd provided that directly contradicted their claims. When they said Lorenzo didn't know Megan was married, we aired a clip of him explicitly talking about her husband. When they claimed Megan hadn't been at Lorenzo's house, Dan followed up with audio that told a different story. With each exchange, I explained the context, leaving no room for ambiguity. By the time we wrapped up, it was clear to the audience who was lying. While it was embarrassing to have so much of my personal life exposed, I felt vindicated. The audience calls that followed were overwhelmingly supportive, with many listeners expressing anger at how Carter's team had misled them. Sports fans value honesty, and they hate being played. After the show, the studio team cheered and congratulated me. Even Dan smiled and asked, "Would you call in again sometime?" As Art walked me to the door, he offered a warning. "Be careful, Ryan. Big sports is full of rich, powerful people like Carter. Stay sharp and avoid trouble." I thanked him, feeling both victorious and cautious as I left. Back at work, the atmosphere was celebratory. Coworkers smiled, patted me on the back, and joked about hearing me on the radio. But reality hit hard when I found several messages from Megan waiting on my desk and phone. Each asked a variation of the same question. "How could you do this to me? To our children? To Lorenzo?" Her concern for Lorenzo stung the most. Any lingering guilt I'd felt evaporated. Just then, Evan called. "Ryan, you've got an arraignment on Monday at 9 a.m. Don't forget, you're being charged with vandalizing Carter's car." "I remember, Evan," I replied. "What should I expect?" "Mostly just entering your plea and setting a trial date," he explained. "But you admitted everything on the emergency call, so the DA might push for a tough penalty since it involves a celebrity. What if I plead guilty and explain the circumstances?" I asked. "That could work," Evan said thoughtfully. "I'll meet with the DA beforehand and make sure the arresting officers are ready to back you up. Let's meet at 8 a.m. Monday." After we hung up, I spent my lunch break reviewing recordings from my house. Most of it was mundane, routine conversations and white noise, but one call between Megan and Amy caught my attention. Amy advised Megan to use more pressure on me, suggesting she remind me that a divorce could leave me with nothing. Megan hesitated, admitting she wasn't sure she could take that approach. Amy encouraged her to be tougher, But Megan's tone was conflicted, torn between Lorenzo and me. Hearing that left me with mixed emotions, relief that she hesitated but frustration at her divided loyalty. The rest of the day was a blur, the high of the radio show overshadowed by the weight of Megan's ongoing deceit. Corey, a coworker, invited me out for drinks with the guys after work. I initially declined, texting Megan to let her know I'd be home for dinner. Her response came almost immediately. "I don't think tonight is a good idea. Let's talk tomorrow." The message was clear. She wasn't ready to face me. Moments later, my phone buzzed with another notification. A text from Megan to Lorenzo. 10 o'clock. I stared at the screen, unsure what to think. My heart sank. When Corey passed by again, I called out, "Hey, Corey, is that invitation still open?" He smiled. "Of course. We're heading to All-Star. See you there." All-Star was your typical sports bar. Flat-screen TVs on every wall, a large rectangular bar in the center, and booths along the edges. As soon as I walked in, Corey waved me over to a high-top table where he was sitting with Matthew, Sarah, and Jacob, all co-workers. Corey and Matthew were single, Jacob was fresh off his honeymoon, and Sarah, like me, was married with 2 kids. The group was quiet at first, clearly unsure of how to approach the evening. I smiled, and Corey broke the tension with a laugh, getting everyone else to relax. "Damn, Ryan," Corey said, still chuckling. "We haven't had this much excitement at work in forever." The conversation turned to my radio interview, and I kept things light, sharing the more humorous moments, like the time Dan quipped, "Sucks to be you." It got some laughs, easing the heaviness that had followed me all day. The bar grew crowded, and I was starting to feel like coming out had been the right choice. I was about to order another drink when I looked up and found myself staring into the bluest eyes I'd ever seen. "Hi, I'm Ashley," she said, her voice warm but hesitant. "Are you Ryan Parker?" Caught off guard, I nodded. "Yes. Have we met?" "No," she replied, "but you've changed my life." Her words hit me like a truck. She quickly explained that she'd been Lorenzo Carter's fiancée, until my story came out. Despite her smile, I could see the pain in her eyes as she recounted how she'd called off their engagement after learning about Megan. Ashley invited us to join her and her friends at a large table by the window. Corey and Matthew were eager, and I agreed, leading the group to the new table. There, we met Ashley's friends, Hannah, Isabel, and Chloe, all cheerleaders. The conversation flowed easily, but the serious topic of Lorenzo and Megan never came up. At one point, the women's attention shifted toward the front door. A petite, striking woman with Mediterranean features walked in, her dark hair framing her face like a lion's mane. Instinctively, I stood as she approached. "Everyone, this is Rachel, our assistant coach," Ashley announced, before turning to me. "And Rachel, this is Ryan Parker." Rachel was stunning, her presence commanding the room. As we shook hands, I saw both excitement and sadness in her eyes. After we sat down, Rachel explained why they all seemed to recognize me. "Your story has shaken our entire team," she said. "Most athletes are used to getting whatever they want, and Lorenzo's no different. He's a star, and the team always turned a blind eye to his behavior, even when he started dating Ashley, which was against the rules." She paused before adding, "But you stood up to him in a way no one expected. Now, the whole team is feeling the heat. Management called a meeting today to address the bad press surrounding Lorenzo. They even mentioned your name specifically." Her words were eye-opening. I'd been so focused on my personal problems that I hadn't realized the broader impact of my actions. For the first time, it felt like the scales were tipping, and the consequences of Lorenzo's actions were catching up to him. As the night at the bar wore on, it became clear that Ashley had dumped Lorenzo after learning about his affair with Megan. She didn't seem heartbroken, more upset that the betrayal had become public knowledge. Corey, eager to fill the void left by Lorenzo, showered her with attention, which Ashley seemed to enjoy. By the end of the evening, the group had dwindled to just Ashley, Corey, Rachel, and me. Rachel and I spent most of the night in conversation, though she was careful not to share much about herself. She seemed genuinely interested in hearing my side of things, but kept the discussion away from her personal life. It felt like she wanted to offer support but wasn't ready to open up, perhaps out of respect for her role as a mentor to the cheerleaders. As it grew late and sensing that Ashley and Corey weren't leaving anytime soon, Rachel leaned toward me and said quietly, "Ryan, I don't want to intrude, but I haven't felt this comfortable talking to someone in a long time. I think there's more we need to discuss, but it doesn't seem like we'll get the chance tonight. Would you like to meet again?" Her words caught me off guard but felt oddly reassuring. I smiled. "I feel the same way, Rachel. There's so much I don't understand yet, and we haven't even talked about you. I'd love to meet again soon." Her face lit up. "How about lunch tomorrow?" "That sounds great. Where would you like to go? Should I pick you up?" Rachel smiled warmly. "No, I'll meet you. How about the Madison? It's quiet, and I've heard the food is good. Does that work for you?" Her suggestion surprised me. The Madison was where everything had started to fall apart, the night Megan left with Lorenzo. It wasn't a place I was eager to revisit, but seeing Rachel's excitement, I pushed those feelings aside. 12:30 at the Madison works. "I'll make the reservation," she said, her smile widening. "Perfect," I replied. "I'll see you then." We wished each other good night, and I left the bar a little after 10 p.m., feeling a mix of emotions. Rachel's presence had been a welcome distraction, but as I drove back to my hotel, my mind kept circling back to Megan's cryptic text earlier, 10 o'clock. When nothing had happened at 10 p.m., I grew suspicious. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to drive by the house. The street was quiet, and the house looked normal, dark except for the living room light. I figured the kids were asleep. I didn't consider myself a stalker, but the light in the living room and the nagging text ate at me. I parked down the street and crept around to the back of the house, peeking through the dark kitchen and family room windows. Everything looked still. Finally, I moved to the porch and glanced into the living room window. Megan was sitting on the love seat, holding a glass of wine, talking to someone just out of view. I was about to leave, thinking I'd learn everything from the recordings later, when I saw a shadow move across the wall. I leaned in closer, and my blood froze. Sitting in my living room, holding a glass of wine, was Lorenzo Carter. A surge of anger and confusion hit me like a freight train. How could this be happening? Why was Lorenzo back in my home? I hadn't received any alerts from the surveillance app, so she must have called him from work or another phone. I wanted to storm in and confront them, but I knew it would only expose the fact that I'd been spying. Just then, the creak of a neighbor's gate and the sound of a trash can rolling down a driveway broke the stillness, triggering a flurry of barking dogs. Feeling exposed, I retreated quickly to my car, muttering, "Crap, crap, crap," under my breath. What the hell was going on? I reassured myself that the surveillance system would have recorded everything, and I'd know the full story tomorrow. Still, sleep was elusive that night. The image of Megan and Lorenzo together haunted me, along with thoughts of Rachel. There was something about her that felt genuine, yet guarded, as if she was holding something back. The next morning, I woke up groggy and frustrated. As I got ready, I listened to the local sports radio. Rumors of a potential postseason trade involving Lorenzo Carter dominated the discussion. It made me wonder how Megan would react to this news, especially after what I'd seen the night before. I texted Megan to confirm she'd left for work. "Good morning, Megan. I hope you slept well. I miss seeing you and the kids. How about dinner tomorrow night?" Her reply was ice cold. "What's the matter? No more crap to sling on the radio today?" Unable to resist, I responded, "Nope. Tell the Aholy he's safe today." Childish? Absolutely. But it felt good to push back. When she didn't reply, I headed to the house. Inside, everything appeared normal, just breakfast dishes in the sink and the faint hum of the fridge. I set up my laptop to download the surveillance files, grabbed the financial documents Laura had requested, and checked the kids' rooms. Ethan's room was its usual mess, the smell of his shampoo still lingering on his pillow. It made me smile despite everything. Sophia's room was spotless, and I noticed a new photo of the two of us from her Halloween party, framed in a heart. That small touch brought tears to my eyes. In the master bedroom, however, I found unsettling changes. My personal items were stashed away, and my clothes had been pushed to the back of the closet, replaced by unfamiliar outfits. It felt like I'd been erased from my own home. Back in the kitchen, the surveillance files had finished downloading. I packed up and headed to Laura's office. She was efficient as always, handing me a list of court-approved counselors and reminding me to pick 3. Later, back at work, my phone rang. It was Amy. I immediately declined the call. She was the last person I wanted to hear from. Minutes later, Adam called, trying to defend her. "She's no friend of mine," I snapped. "Ryan," Adam said hesitantly. "After Megan left the club with that idiot on Friday, Amy said something shocking. She told me that if Lorenzo had picked her instead of Megan, she'd have done the same thing to me that Megan did to you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Adam," I said coldly, "if that's true, your marriage is on thin ice." We exchanged a few more tense words before hanging up, neither of us budging in our opinions. Adam needed Amy in his life, just like I needed her out of mine. Back in my office, I locked the door and reviewed the surveillance files from the previous night. Rachel's text confirming lunch came through as I watched Megan get the kids to bed. Afterward, she spent an hour getting dressed and putting on makeup, as if preparing for a date. "Not a good sign," I muttered. Right before 10 o'clock, Megan, dressed to impress, answered a call. A man's voice came through the speaker. "I'm 5 out." Moments later, Megan opened the door and welcomed Lorenzo into the house. They shared wine in the kitchen before moving to the living room, where Megan sat on the love seat, keeping some distance from Lorenzo. At least they weren't kissing, but their conversation quickly turned troubling. Lorenzo vented about my press and radio appearances, accusing me of tarnishing his reputation and jeopardizing his endorsement deals. He pressured Megan to get me to stop, making it sound like a shared responsibility to manage the situation. Before I could see where things would go, a knock at my office door pulled me away. Sarah rushed in with a client issue that needed immediate attention. By the time we resolved it, it was nearly noon. As I grabbed my coat, Sarah hesitated, her concern clear. "Sorry for barging in earlier, boss. You seem off. Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied curtly. "Just caught me at a bad time. I've got a lunch appointment, but I'll check in when I'm back." At the Madison, I spotted Rachel right away. She looked even more stunning than I remembered. As we settled into lunch, she opened up about her challenging childhood, sharing how tragedy struck when her father died in a car accident. Her stepfather was abusive, and her mother fell into depression, leaving Rachel to navigate life largely on her own. Despite her hardships, she spoke with quiet strength, and for a while, I forgot about everything else. That is, until Megan stormed toward our table, her face a mask of anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded loudly. "Who is this woman?" I stayed calm. "Lower your voice, Megan. You're having an affair," she hissed. "This isn't an affair. It's lunch," I replied, my tone firm and loud enough for others to hear. "An affair is when a wife sleeps with someone who isn't her husband. You should know." Megan paled as whispers rippled through the restaurant. I turned to Rachel and said, "Would you mind giving us a moment?" Rachel nodded graciously, and I led Megan outside, passing Amy on my way. It was obvious now who had tipped Megan off. "Everyone in that restaurant knows what you just did," I said. "They probably think you're crazy on top of everything else." "Who is she?" Megan demanded again. "Her name is Rachel, and you introduced us," I said coldly. Megan's face twisted with disbelief. "Well," I added, "if you hadn't spent the weekend with Lorenzo, she wouldn't be sitting with me today." "Amy said she saw you holding her hand," Megan pressed. "She shared something painful, and I was consoling her," I explained. "That's what decent people do, Megan. You always said married people shouldn't meet others alone without telling their spouse," she snapped. She wasn't wrong. I had said that before, but I wasn't letting her deflect. "And you've done far worse recently," I shot back. "You keep bringing up what I did," she retorted. "Don't you understand that was different?" "I'm not even talking about Friday," I said evenly. Her face went pale. "What did you do last night?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I was with the kids." "Really?" "I stopped by the house, Megan." Her eyes widened. "Why didn't you come in?" "Because you weren't alone." She froze. What did you see?" "Enough to know you're lying," I said. "We need to talk, but not here. Come by after work." Without waiting for her response, I turned back into the restaurant. On my way to the table, I stopped at Amy's. "You're a vile person, Amy," I said quietly but firmly. Stay out of my life. If I see or hear from you again, you won't like what happens." Amy's jaw dropped, and I slammed my fist on the table. "Nod your head, Amy. Do you understand?" She nodded quickly, her face pale. Back at the table, Rachel was staring out the window, trying to give me space. When I sat down, she turned to me with gentle concern. "That must have been awful," she said softly, "but you handled it well." Her empathy surprised me. Even after being insulted, she thought of me first, something Megan hadn't done in a long time. We tried to pick up the conversation, but my mind wandered. Had Megan ever shown real empathy during the tough times? She'd always been kind and confident, but empathy? That had never been her strength, especially not lately. We finished lunch, thanked each other, and agreed to stay in touch, though no specific plans were made. As we parted with a polite kiss on the cheek, I realized that time and space might be exactly what I needed. At the office, my team greeted me warmly, celebrating our recent project success. But I wasn't in the mood to join in. I shut my office door and began reviewing the recordings from the night before. The day blurred, and I barely registered Sarah saying goodnight as she left. By the time I headed home, it was after 6. Despite my dread, I knew I needed to see the kids. The house was quiet when I arrived, save for the smell of something baking in the oven. On the dining table, there was a letter from Megan. In it, she apologized for her actions with Lorenzo, expressed regret, and begged for a chance to rebuild our marriage. A week ago, I might have treasured that letter. Even 24 hours ago, I might have considered it. But after everything I'd seen and heard, it felt hollow. I folded the letter, slipped it into my coat pocket, and grabbed a beer, waiting for Megan and the kids to come home. The evening with the kids was perfect, playing, wrestling, laughing. But after dinner, Megan poured us drinks and sat down, clearly ready to talk. "I'm too tired tonight," I said firmly. "We'll talk tomorrow." As I stood to leave, she asked, "Don't I even rate a kiss?" I paused, gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, and left. Back at the hotel, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone chirped. It was a text from Amy to Megan. "So, how did he take it?" Megan replied, "I don't know. He didn't stay long, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him." Amy wrote, "He's such a crap. He'll never find someone as amazing as you." Megan's reply was hesitant. "I don't know, Amy. He seemed distant, like someone had died. I'm not sure where his head is." Amy responded cryptically, "Don't worry, you're not stuck in a convent." The exchange ended, but the weight of it settled over me. The cracks in our marriage weren't just showing. They were widening into an unfixable divide. It was clear Megan had shared some details about her time with Lorenzo, but was keeping the worst parts even from Amy. Just as I was about to fall asleep, another notification came through. A recording of Megan's call to Lorenzo after texting Amy. I hit play. Megan flirted while Lorenzo reassured her, even promising to wear his football towel a certain way during the game as a signal to her. He complained about my press appearances, claiming I was making his life difficult, and pushed Megan to take the next step with him. He boasted he could give her a better life than I ever could. Megan admitted their night together was the best sex of her life and acknowledged the attraction, but she maintained I was still the father of her children. They ended the call professing their love. I woke up early, the events of the past week weighing heavily. It felt like any hope for a happy ending was slipping away. Determined to take control, I decided to move back home, if only to stay closer to my kids. I texted Megan about my plan, and her enthusiastic response came quickly. "That's great news, honey. The kids will be thrilled. We need to talk." At the house, I set up my laptop to download more surveillance files. Unable to stomach sharing a bed with her, I moved into Ethan's room, setting up an air mattress and organizing his toys. I also cleared Megan's belongings from the bedroom, moving her clothes to Sophia's room and storing the extras in the garage. Megan wouldn't be happy, but I knew she'd see it as temporary. Throughout the day, Megan texted cheerfully, clearly eager to move forward. When I arrived home that evening, everything felt surreal. The kids were dressed up and watching TV while Megan, dressed as if for a date, finished preparing dinner. The table was set with our best dishes. She didn't mention the new sleeping arrangements, though upstairs I noticed she'd rearranged things. Our wedding photo now sat on my side of the bed, while a glamour shot of her faced me from the other. Dinner was subdued but polite. Ethan was thrilled about his room's new setup, while Sophia was less enthused about sharing hers. I reassured them it wasn't permanent. Megan smiled, clearly pleased with herself. After dinner, she uncharacteristically insisted on doing the dishes, leaving me to spend time with the kids. Later, when they were asleep, Megan was waiting in the living room with wine for herself and a beer for me. "Ryan, I know you're tired, but we need to talk," she said. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" I replied, avoiding eye contact. Frustrated, she pressed, "I just want to discuss everything you've been saying to the press and on the radio." It was clear her concern was Lorenzo, not us. I stood. "Nothing's planned for tonight, so it can wait. Good night." I went upstairs, leaving her stunned. That night, my phone chirped repeatedly with what I knew were messages between Megan and Lorenzo, but I ignored them. I slept better knowing I'd frustrated their plans. The next morning, I started yard work early, declining Megan's call for breakfast. Around 10 a.m., she came outside asking if I could watch the kids while she went shopping. I agreed, happy to have time with them. When she returned that afternoon with only a few bags, my suspicions grew. Later, when she knocked for dinner, I pretended to nap, ignoring the chirping of my phone. The next day, I left a note, taking the kids to the zoo. Back by dinner. "Have a great day." We had a fantastic day, and I turned off my phone to avoid distractions. When we got home, the kids were asleep, and Megan was waiting at the kitchen table. "Where have you been? Why was your phone off?" she demanded. "We were at the zoo." "I didn't want to be disturbed," I said calmly. Her scowl deepened, but she dropped it. When I mentioned dinner plans with Evan, she reminded me angrily that we were supposed to talk. "I spent the whole day with my family," I replied flatly. "I'm not ready to talk to you." I left the Sunday Sentinel on the counter with its front-page headline, "Carter is history. Local star traded to Salt Lake City." Megan glanced at it, showing no surprise. "That was unfair, Ryan," she said coldly. "Lorenzo didn't deserve that." My temper flared. "A lot of people are responsible for what happened, Megan, including someone in this kitchen." I left, pretending I had plans with Evan, but really just needing space. That evening, I scrolled through Megan's texts and listened to a furious Carter railing about his trade. The thought of him wooing married women while being humiliated made me laugh. When I returned home, the house was dark except for a light in Megan's room. I quietly entered the master bedroom, only for Megan to knock moments later. She came in wearing a revealing robe, her face full of sadness. "Is there any chance for us, Ryan?" she asked, desperate. "I don't know, Megan," I replied honestly. "If you'd come home with me instead of staying with Carter, maybe. But now? I'm not sure." She broke down, pleading. "I never meant for this to happen. I love you, Ryan. Please, tell me we can fix this." I pulled away. "It's too late now. I'm not the same person anymore. I have a hearing tomorrow and need sleep." When I asked if she planned to attend, Megan quickly said yes, determined to do whatever it took to repair things. I simply said, "Good night, Megan," and closed the door. The next morning, I was up early, ready for the hearing. By 6 a.m., I was out the door, stopping for gas and glancing at a newspaper with yet another story about Carter's downfall. At Evan's office near the courthouse, he reassured me about the day's proceedings. I nodded, trying to calm myself as we entered the courthouse lobby, where the deputies were screening everyone with the intensity of TSA agents. It was time to face the next chapter. Since the courthouse handled both criminal and civil cases, it seemed they preferred dealing with troublemakers at the door rather than inside a courtroom. After clearing security, Evan and I rode the elevator to the third floor, where long hallways were lined with dark-paneled walls and windows overlooking the city. Evan spotted a middle-aged woman in a suit, Samantha Hill, the assistant district attorney, and greeted her. "Bobby, you just had to ruin my easy morning, didn't you?" she said with a wry chuckle. Evan excused himself to speak with her, leaving me to text Megan, letting her know I had arrived. She replied she was at the office and to let her know when the hearing started. While waiting, I looked up the citation I'd been charged with, malicious mischief to a vehicle. The misdemeanor carried a potential penalty of 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine. The idea of jail time gnawed at me. Just then, Evan returned. "She's gone," But it was a good talk, he said. I told him about my research, but he waved it off. Ryan, let me handle this. We entered the empty courtroom, which looked straight out of a courtroom drama. I sat in the first row behind the defense table as Evan spread out his materials. Slowly, the room began to fill. At 9 a.m., the bailiff ordered all cell phones silenced, and when the judge entered, everyone rose, then sat in unison. Evan whispered that my case had been pushed to the end of the docket, as expected. For 2 grueling hours, we listened to other cases, most far more serious than mine. The judge's patience wore thin as the morning dragged on. By 11:20, the courtroom had mostly emptied, and Samantha Hill returned with an assistant. I noticed Lisa Collins, the reporter, sitting quietly in the back, but Megan was still nowhere to be seen. When the judge finally called my case, the charges were read aloud. Malicious mischief for damaging Lorenzo Carter's car. The judge asked both attorneys if they'd spoken and believed the case could be resolved today. They agreed and were called into chambers. I sat alone, the weight of the situation sinking in. 2 police officers entered, likely the ones who had arrested me, and took seats near the back. Then, just as I was losing hope, Carter entered, followed by Megan. She tried to act like they hadn't arrived together, but her guilty expression betrayed her. Megan slid into the seat next to me, whispering, "Has it started?" I briefly explained the situation and signaled her to stay quiet. 15 minutes later, Evan and the prosecutor returned, followed by the judge. Evan signaled me to stand beside him. The judge addressed me directly. "Mr. Parker, are you ready to enter a plea?" "Yes, Your Honor," Evan replied for me. The judge acknowledged Evan's efforts on my behalf and asked about restitution. He reviewed repair estimates, noting that the damage ranged from $88 to $348. Evan had also mentioned the $500 I had offered in restitution, which Carter had declined. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Parker, is it true you offered restitution of $500? "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. Carter immediately stood, shouting, "That's a lie. He never offered me anything." The judge turned to Megan. "Mrs. Parker, can you confirm if your husband offered Mr. Carter $500 in restitution?" Megan froze, clearly caught off guard. She glanced at Carter, who gave her a subtle signal on how to respond. Then she looked at me, but I offered her nothing. Finally, she said, "No, Your Honor. Ryan didn't offer Lorenzo anything." The judge pressed her again, warning of the consequences of perjury. Megan stood firm. "I'm sure, Your Honor. I was there the whole time, and if he had, I would have seen it." It was clear Carter still had a hold on her. The prosecutor called Officer Emily Foster to the stand. She testified that I had asked her to document the $500 check I left under Carter's windshield wiper. She even mentioned photographing the check before seeing Carter tear it up in front of Megan. When the judge asked for my plea, I said, "Guilty, Your Honor." The judge deferred sentencing for a year, placing me on unsupervised probation. If I stayed out of trouble, the charge would be dismissed. Carter, furious, stood to argue, but the judge silenced him, noting that my restitution offer had been more than fair. The judge then addressed Carter and Megan, accusing them of attempting to deceive the court. Both were sentenced to 3 days in jail for contempt. As the courtroom emptied, a man approached Carter and Megan, serving them legal papers. Carter's fall from grace was complete. His career ended shortly after his trade to Salt Lake City. Megan moved to California following our divorce, which was finalized within months. I was granted full custody of the kids, and slowly, life began to move forward. After the divorce, I reconnected with Rachel. Over time, we became serious. One quiet evening by the lake, I proposed. To my surprise, she said yes. We married a few months later, and Rachel gradually became a beloved part of our family. The moment I knew we had truly become a family was when Sophia and Ethan, after a perfect day at an amusement park, called Rachel Mom for the first time. That night, as we hugged and reflected on how far we had come, Rachel looked up at me with a warm smile. "Do you think it's too soon to start talking about having more kids?" she asked softly. For the first time in years, I felt hope for the future. "Not too soon at all," I said, pulling her close.